My name's Tony Waters. I head up the SDK. So everything you've seen so far today is largely my fault, because it's my job to decide what we do with the product and drive the direction. So what I want to do mainly is cover what's coming next. So everything you've seen so far today is pretty much what's available in the SDK today, some of the new platforms and new features we've been working on. What I want to go through is pretty much what's the next step for Marmalade. But also want to just do a quick recap on what we've done this year. There's an awful lot of change in Marmalade over the last 12 months since the last developer day, so I want to quickly go through that as well. I also want to touch on Marmalade 7. So you've seen that this morning, but what I really want to go through is why we've done that and what we're aiming to do with that new initiative. Whenever you do a roadmap presentation, there's always lots of questions. So it's a 45-minute session. I don't have that many charts, so right at the end, very interactive, pretty much fire anything at me, and I'll say, on the roadmap. Okay, so as I said, before I thought about doing this presentation, I actually looked at my charts from last year, mainly because I was worried there'd be something on there that I promised that we'd do and we hadn't done. But I was actually surprised. We did pretty much everything I said we would do. And for example, just on the platforms front, this time last year, we were pretty much ARM only. Now we also support desktop on Windows and Mac. We also have x86 and MIP support on Android. We've added Windows Phone 8, BlackBerry 10, Tizen just added a couple of months ago, Roku, and 2 versions of LG TV. That's an awful lot of platforms for a year of work. We've also had quite a few new partners into Marmalade as well. So this is just a quick selection. There are actually more than that, but these are ones I know we've made a big effort with. Some of them are actually integrated into Marmalade 7 itself. So one of the things we've changed, I can't remember if Fernando showed you this morning, but we've actually integrated some of those partner extensions directly into the SDK to make it really easy to use. And some of those will be coming, a few more coming in later releases as well. Marmalade Quick, which Jamie and Nick demonstrated earlier. So this, again, was completely new this year. It started out as an R&D project back in 2012. We worked quite closely with Marmalade Studio. As you know, they developed Signal to the Stars based on Marmalade Quick, which was actually the first game, we believe, that was released simultaneously on the Apple App Store, Google Play, Amazon App Store, as well as BlackBerry World. There might be another one, but it's the only one we're aware of. And that was kind of interesting. It moves us a bit away from C++, but it was an interesting project to do. And then Juice. So this has been really interesting. Nick and Nick did a demo earlier. By the way, if your name's Nick at Marmalade, you have to have ginger hair and a beard. So if anyone's thinking of applying called Nick, you might have to go through some changes. But this is really exciting. So this again started out as an R&D project. In fact, it was actually a weekend project for one of our engineers. We had this brilliant idea and got some of the Cocos 2D games up and running very quickly on Marmalade. So over the last year or so, we've really proved out that technology with a couple of commercial projects. Kingdom Clash, which just released last week, and Tap Paradise Code released earlier this year. There's 2 or 3 other projects we're working on as well at the same time we can't really talk about. But I'm really excited about what we can do with this. And the next stage of this project is actually going to be productized into the SDK for early release next year. Along with that are some really interesting tools around profiling that we hopefully move into the SDK as well. And then, just last week, Marmalade 7. So this is really marks a step change for the SDK. It's the next generation, it starts the next generation of the product. And really, initially, it's mainly targeted at improving the workflow and user experience, but it really is about improving it for everybody. One of the other things we've done over the last year or so is the developer incentive programs, and that has literally brought on a lot of new developers to Marmalade, and I'm not joking, thousands of apps have been delivered to those programs, to the BlackBerry App World and to Windows Store. A lot of those new developers, new to Marmalade, to be honest, it can be a bit tricky to get used to. It's quite a complex product. A lot of the experienced developers I talk to, they say to me the same thing. They really struggle to understand what Marmalade is and how it works. And once they got that, they absolutely love it. So what we really tried to do with this release of Marmalade was make it very easy to get started with Marmalade, trying to help with that. And the website actually is along those lines as well. So a lot of the work we've been doing with changing the messaging on the website is to help people understand what it is Marmalade, what are you getting with Marmalade? We didn't really talk about C++, for example, on the old website. All sorts of people were probably a bit confused when they downloaded it. But this is really just the start. There are a lot of things we wanted to put in M7, as we call it internally, that didn't quite make it. A few of those, so moves on to what's happening next. So later this year, there's a few things. So Pi support across all ARM platforms. Does anyone know what Pi is? No? Few people. I've spoken to a few people about it already, so they probably know. So Pi stands for Position Independent Executable. So Apple earlier this year started putting out warnings in their App Store submissions saying your app is a non-Pi binary. And what that means is, to be a Pi binary, you need to be able to be loaded anywhere in virtual memory. Marmalade currently relies on knowing exactly where your app is loaded in memory. So that's a bit of an issue for us. We spent the last 4 or 5 months doing a lot of work re-architecting the iOS loader so it can support Pi-based apps. There's also an update to GCC that will give the ability to build Pi or PIC code, position-independent code, with the Marmalade toolchain. That unfortunately wasn't quite ready, so we're going to have to go for another iteration of development on that. But that will be in the SDK before the end of the year. One of the side effects of that is the GCC update. So this is something that's been long overdue, to be honest. We really should have done this quite a while ago. What it does give is pretty much most of the C++ 11 features now be supported in the product. There are a few more that we need to do because they need a standard library update, which we haven't done yet. But it does a real big push forward. The other feature that didn't quite make it was something called --iPhone. I don't know if anyone of you are aware of that. Effectively, it's our way of doing on-device debugging on iOS. So it's a beta feature that's been in the SDK for a couple of years. What it effectively allows you to do is, instead of building a Marmalade app, you actually use the Apple toolchain to build a real Apple app with the loader as a static library. That allows you to use Apple's native simulator, but also their on-device tools, so you can use Xcode to do debugging, etc. So that also didn't quite make it. We're going for the end of the year. And the last one is some additional featured integration and extensions. We started calling by the way, our extensions and middleware integrations. The reasons for that is, for those experienced developers know there's a technical difference between an EDK extension and a middleware extension. So for marketing terms, we just call them integrations from now on. So there's a few more of those to go in. We've been working quite closely with a number of partners. And what it really does is allow you to very easily integrate things like Flurry Analytics, Photon support into your apps, very, very simply right from within the SDK. So the fastest way to build cross-platform C++ games. That's written on the back of everyone's T-shirt, or the Marmalade guys' T-shirts anyway. It's also front and center of a new website. The reason I put that up there is this is what Marmalade is about today, but it's also what Marmalade is about for the next, well, forever, but for the next 6 months this is the focus. But I want to go break this down a little bit into exactly what we mean by that. So by fastest, we don't just mean performance, we also mean speed of development and use. Now, traditionally, Marmalade has prioritized being most compatible across different platforms. So we've gone for lowest common denominator. So we're always probably an instruction set or two behind on the ARM side. We went for example, we had fixed point just to, and software rendering, all these things just so you make sure that when you wrote your app once, it worked on as many devices as possible. The reality is that's pretty useful, but a lot of our developers really want to go for the absolute cutting-edge devices. Maybe they want to tweak their app just for those, or maybe they just want to forget about the lower-end devices and go for those alone. So we're spending a lot of time over the next 4 to 6 months really pushing that into the SDK, so you have that capability. As you're all probably aware, ARM are actually a shareholder in Marmalade, and so we're working quite closely with them on how we can do that. On the development speed and ease side of things, so the hub was really a start in that. It's, to be honest, pretty basic. It's mainly aimed at new users right now. Some things we wanted to do in the hub required substantial changes to the SDK itself that we couldn't really do in the time frame. So in particular, the MKB system really needs a bit of refactor. We wanted to add in some features around making it very easy to do a sort of UI editing of configuration within the hub, also more of a project managed side of things. But also we're looking at sort of on-device debugging and profiling. So the --iPhone work that we're going for this year is on iOS. But Android's coming soon after that. We actually already support it in Windows Phone 8, but we'll continue to across the platforms. And as already mentioned, the Juice project we've been doing has put in some profiling tools as well that we're going to put into the main SDK. Cross-platform. It goes without saying we will continue to add more platforms. We have 2 actually in the pipeline right now that have been developed out in our services team, and I'm sure next year there will be more of those as well. But also cross-platform APIs. So one of the side effects of from the Juice project, no, actually it's from the Quick project, we have a new API called IW Billing. What that is the middleware API for doing in-app purchase across different platforms. So you don't have to redevelop your in-app purchase APIs for each platform you hit. You can use that middleware module and we figure out behind the scenes which platform you're running on. We want to do more of those sort of things, so it means that you have less work to do as you target each individual platform, and most of the common things are handled for you. And finally, C++ and games. I'll be honest, I think over the last year or 2, we've probably spent too much time doing a lot of different things and not really focused on our core technology. It doesn't mean we're going to stop development on things like Juice and Quick. In fact, it's the opposite. We'll continue to support those. But the bulk of the engineering effort is going to be on our target core group of developers, which is C++ and games. And that's where the focus is going to be, certainly for the first half of next year. So what does it actually mean in real things? The first one, so I already talked through some of that performance improvements and the MKB stuff we want to do. One of the real things that's holding us back right now, has been for a bit of time, is the core architecture of the loader itself. Marmalade is originally designed in the pre-iPhone days, where you had to be a lot more considerate to the platform you're running on. So Symbian and Brew phones were phones primarily, whereas from iOS onwards, it's a proper, pretty much a desktop OS you're walking around in your pockets. A lot of things that Marmalade does for you as a developer, we don't really need to be doing anymore. So one of the projects we've been doing for, it must be about 6 months now, is we have actually a small team working on a redesign of the core loader. It's literally from the ground up, moving away from the existing tech to a new one. It's a pretty radical project. It's very substantially different. It's where a lot of performance gains are going to come from. What we are going to do is make sure it's backwards compatible with Marmalade 7, for example. All of the existing APIs will still work, but it probably will mean if you want to get the maximum performance, there will be some changes to make. I've spoken to a few guys about those specifically already, but as a very high level, Marmalade's inherently loop-based today. It's going to be event-driven, so to make the use out of the maximum performance, you probably have to make some game-side changes to support that sort of model. We are actually going to re-implement looping as a side, so you can easily migrate and pick when you want to move across. But that, along with the MKB refactor, really allows us to hit those performance gains we want to hit, make sure we're targeting, or able to target the absolute highest performance. And that's really the key thing, why you guys are choosing Marmalade, is with such a low-level way of doing platform abstraction, you can get that maximum performance out of your apps. Along with that, so more on-device debugging and profiling. Again, that's coming out of the Juice project, but also bringing that equivalent of -- iPhone to Android and some of our other platforms as well. So the hub, I hope you guys like it. I must admit, it's pretty radical change what we were doing. We think we've made the right choice in what we're doing, but one of the things I will say, we really would appreciate some feedback. At the end of the day, your guys' opinion is what really matters. I can change the color of the UI and these sorts of things, but it doesn't actually, I don't actually have to buy a license. I get it for free. But you guys are really the people that are using it day in, day out. So if you have any feedback, right now is the time to give it, because we're heading in a particular direction with the hub, and we want to make sure we get it right. Some things we're going to be doing, or certainly on the roadmap in the next 4 to 6 months, are around some additional tutorials and templates. So templates, something new we've added. We've only really got a few in there, sort of basics 2D games, 3D games, adding things like Flurry and Emobi straight in there. We're going to add some more of those, so there's some standard templates you can use. There's also the ability to convert an existing project into a template. So if you're doing similar games, you can be able to reuse that. I already hinted at this a little bit, so there's an MKB and ICF editor inside the hub planned, and also a project browser, so you can add in assets and any C++ files as well directly from inside the hub, so it adds a bit more of a project management side to it. The other big update is around the simulator as well, so really more of a UI refresh on that, and a bit of behind the scenes, quite a bit of separation of how the technology works. The next one is middleware source availability. So right now we have some extensions available in our GitHub code community, and also a few of our middleware modules. The plan is to move the bulk of our middleware up onto GitHub, so you guys can fork it, make any change you want to do, but also means that if there are anything tweaks you want to make for your project, you can do it very, very quickly, rather than sending us a feature request and waiting for the next release and prioritization, etc. Doesn't mean we're going to abandon it. We still continue to develop it internally, and we'll keep pushing up our versions as we develop internally, but it gives you that flexibility to do things. Marmalade Juice, we talked about, that's going to be productized. Plan is to have that available at the end of January-ish. And as already talked about, we have a couple of new platforms already in development. I'm absolutely certain there'll be more through 2014 as well. So beyond those things already mentioned, and I'm quite bullish about what I want the guys to do, but realistically, I suspect some of those things might spill out beyond the first 6 months of next year. What we want to do is really over to you. We really want to engage a bit more than we have done probably in the past on the sort of features and capability you want to look for the product. What I've actually lifted up here is just something to give you an idea of the sort of things we do talk about internally quite regularly, about what sort of products should we really be building. So the first obvious one is, do we have the right mix of languages? I mean, primarily C++, we've added things like Lua with Quick. We dabbled in HTML5 a couple of years ago with Web Marmalade, but do we need to look at things like C#, for example? I don't think we're going Java. But those sort of things, this sort of conversation we have a lot internally. HTML5 is another interesting one. I mean, we put that out there, and we haven't really done much with it since, but that's something else we discussed about where we need to go back and start looking at actually having real game-grade HTML5 capability inside the platform. Right mix of IDEs. So a lot of people use Marmalade on a PC because they love Visual Studio. Should be supporting something else. Eclipse quite often comes up. Additional tools to support enhance or create. So a lot of things we've done with the hub is more about project management. Really, it's a combination of the old deploy tool and the launchpad. But there are other things we want to look at. So I don't know if you guys have used things like Director and Viewer, but should we start looking at those a bit more seriously? There's also better integrations with things like Max and Maya, and maybe there's some other art packages we should be looking at as well. Non-games developers. So I'm guessing vast majority of people here are games developers. Any non-games developers? 1, 2. So the SDK is definitely targeted at games developers. It doesn't mean it's not applicable to non-games. But I think there's a lot of things we could do to make you guys' lives easier. So that's certainly some feedback. Now I've spotted both of you. I'll be talking to you later. So, sort of things we could do to make it easier for non-games apps to work, or use Marmalade a bit better. Linux. So this has come up a lot recently, both in terms of deployment and development. Obviously, a lot of the deployment side of things are centered around this thing called Steambox, you might have heard. So there's a lot of interest in that. But also we have got a lot of people who want to use Linux as a development platform. So that's something that comes up quite a lot internally as well. And the last one I've put on there is, how do we get bug fixes and answers out of developers as quickly as possible? This is more of an internal tech issue for us. Right now, although we do a lot of automated testing, we still do about 120 man-hours of manual testing for each release. There's certain things we just find it very difficult to test with or automation, things like orientation changes. We don't have any robots in the office that can move phones up and down, for example. So there's a lot of manual testing going on. So we're doing a lot of work to minimize that. But what I really challenging the engineering team to do is get us in a position where we can actually do daily releases of Marmalade. We're not quite there yet, but that's what I'm aiming to do. And also a lot of the initiatives around putting the source code out there on GitHub is to make that easier for you guys to use. And then, this is our slogan again, but you notice I've removed a few key words from there. Where I'd like to take Marmalade is it's the fastest way to build cross-platform, full stop. I still think our heart will be C++. The great thing about being C++ at the heart is it's very easy to add other languages on top of it, because ultimately most things come down to C++ at the end of things. But also we need to eventually move out of the games certainly into enterprise apps, and that's something I'd like to start focusing on as well as we move into probably beyond 2014, to be honest.